This episode is brought to you in part by Pittsburgh Seminary's Henderson Leadership Conference, September 22nd to 24th, with Dr. Diana Butler Bass. Attend in person or online for lectures and workshops with strategies for ministry amid political and theological divisions. Visit www.pts.edu/Henderson.
This episode is brought to you by Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global media organization that makes the life-changing wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to all. Visit whereyou'refrom.org for more information. That's whereyafrom.org.
Hey, Truce Podcast listeners, this is Chris Starin, and as you know, we are trying to raise $25,000 to support the Truce Podcast. Right now, we're at $3,800, which is a great start, but we've got a long way to go. Truce is the most original Christian podcast on the market. We're covering stories that nobody else is talking about, really important stories. If you'd like to be a part of making Truce even better, visit trucepodcast.com/donate. That's trucepodcast.com/donate. Thank you for your prayers and for telling your friends about the Truce Podcast. Again, the website is trucepodcast.com/donate. In our last episode, we talked about the addition of the words "under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance. And we went into the upsides of political education through things like pledges. But we didn't really have time to discuss the reality that not everyone is excited about political pledges. In this Truce Podcast bonus, we're going to continue our conversation with Charles Dorn. His books are For the Common Good, A New History of Higher Education in America, and Patriotic Education in a Global Age. He also teaches at Bowdoin College. This episode is brought to you by No Small Endeavor, the acclaimed podcast from Great Feeling Studios and PRX. In each episode, host and award-winning theologian Lee C. Camp sits down with courageous and impassioned people, like Hollywood legend Rob Reiner and civil rights hero Reverend James Lawson, talking about what it means to find true happiness and flourish in day-to-day life. And if you're looking for somewhere to start, why not check out the recent episode with award-winning journalist and best-selling author Tim Alberta on Christian nationalism's role in the Republican Party. Follow No Small Endeavor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Not everyone is excited about saying the pledge. And in many school districts, the pledge used to be mandatory. What that means is that kids were required to stand and put their hand over their hearts, or before World War II, they were supposed to put their right arm out with a flat palm. Basically, the Hitler salute. You can probably guess why that was changed. No matter how you do it, there is a physical veneration of an object when you salute the flag. People are looking to a physical thing and ascribing honor to it. To many Americans, that is totally fine. But not everyone is okay with honoring an object. Here is Charles Dorn.
So kids are, for the most part, not just sitting at their desks reciting these words. They're actually doing something. And that is interpreted by many members of the Jehovah's Witnesses as a veneration of a flag. It's basically sort of praying to a false idol, if you will.
To some people, saluting the flag looks just like that, like honoring another god. Parents have to choose whether to go against their religious convictions or have their kids stand up against this practice.
And so Walter Gobitis instructs his children, Billy and Lillian, to refuse essentially to do this, that this is worshiping a false idol, and that our faith comes before this sort of secular instruction in school. And so the kids are expelled, and the Jehovah's Witness legal team cooperates with the American Civil Liberties Union, which is an interesting pairing, to pursue a court challenge on the grounds that pledging the flag is an act of idolatry and it's strictly forbidden by the witnesses' faith.
Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court of the United States.
And the court rules 8-1 that the school districts have the constitutional authority to require that the children salute the flag.
This is a sticky issue. I mean, you can argue that kids should be made to salute the flag because it's unpatriotic for them not to do so. But then you get into questions of religious liberty, right? I mean, it's complicated. Even some Protestant believers are uneasy about saluting objects. It's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's go back to Professor Dorn.
It is an 8-1 opinion. The majority decision is authored by Justice Felix Frankfurter, and it later becomes known as Felix's Fall of France decision because it's actually, by the time the oral arguments begin in the Gobitis case, Nazi armies had essentially invaded Poland, swept through Belgium, cornered the French and the British at Dunkirk, and democracy, if you will, is sort of on the retreat to fascism.
And what sounds more fascist than making kids stand up and pledge allegiance to their country? We're getting into questions of whether or not this is indoctrination because the kids are being punished for questioning this practice.
And the Supreme Court rules essentially that it doesn't have that the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to dictate what should happen at the local basis with schools. But Frankfurter says in that majority opinion that national unity is the basis of national security. And so it's clear that what's happening in the United States and around the world at this moment in time is influential. Unfortunately, what happens is that there are Americans who interpret that decision as permission to essentially enact violence against Jehovah's Witnesses. And so, although there are debates about this decision on the editorial pages of the country's newspapers, there are beatings, acts of arson of the witnesses, and there is some real concern, and almost immediately on the part of some of the Supreme Court justices, that this was a mistake. And that it was a misreading, essentially, of the law. And so another case is brought forth rather quickly. And this is West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett. And that decision overturned. So just 3 years later, overturns the Gobitis decision. And this is a 6-3 decision. And court rules for the witnesses. And the decision, interestingly enough, is the opinion is delivered on Flag Day, 1943. And so now we're at the height of America's involvement in World War II. And Justice Jackson will write for the majority in this case, and this becomes an often cited claim in this opinion that if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not now occur to us. And so the decision is overturned.
From that point on, kids have been able to sit out the Pledge of Allegiance. This is interesting in a number of ways. There are a lot of American Christians who get upset when people don't show their patriotism. On the other hand, we kind of go nuts when there is any political objection to our religious practices. Think about how ugly Facebook got during the height of the coronavirus when churches weren't allowed to meet. There were some big questions there, like do the patriotic thing and stop the global pandemic, or continue to meet and potentially infect a bunch of people because it's your right to do so. Obey the government or follow your conviction. Though the stakes are much lower, it's a similar thing when it comes to saluting the flag. As we'll see in the next few episodes, all of this gets really tricky. As Christians became more and more tied to the United States, objections to U.S. policy became slights against the church in the eyes of many. To others, issues of racism, segregation, gender inequality, and any disagreement with the government also got tied to Christianity. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Should American public school kids say the pledge? Should Christians say it? Where's the line between religious liberty and patriotic duty? Comment on social media and we just may use it on the show. That's it for this Truce Podcast Extra. If you'd like to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to the feed so you get every new episode as it's released. God willing, we'll talk again next week.